So, Boker, Kokhav. Which morning star? According to the early translators, steeped in the traditions of Christendom, you were to believe that Yeshua, Satan, and a Babylonian king are all one and the same morning star. It's an issue that's widely misunderstood by most theologians, who, because of their theories, cause even more confusion. The first step, as always, is to come back to the original Hebrew that recognises several meanings and contexts that define the identity. First of all, Venus is both the morning star and the evening star, depending on its position. It can be both. It can move from one side of the sun to the other side of the sun, and it's either the morning star or the evening star. This, of course, has led to it's tied to many pagan myths that describe its worship and incorporated it into the many of the so-called interpretations. Hallel, or Lucifer, was never used as a title for Satan, as it simply means, as in the Greek, Hesophoros, the bringer of dawn, the morning star, the shining one, and it simply describes its original function. And it describes his original function before his fall. Literally fall. And that's why he can present himself as an angel of light. But it can also be a description of a man. Even Wycliffe, the original English translator, was described as the morning star of the Reformation. It's a description, not a title. Devil is Greek for slanderer. Again, it was never a title. It was just a description. As is Hasatan, which means the adversary or the accuser. Remember, Hasatan is men's enemy, not Yahweh's. This is often portrayed that you've got, God here and Satan there, and the two are locked in this combat. It's nothing to do with it. He isn't God's enemy. He isn't his. He's just this little ant down here.
Well, if you read the book of Job, it talks about how the adversary actually obeys everything that God tells him.
Of course he does. Yeah. When Yeshua challenged him with the word, then he had to back off. Yeah. Why did he back off if he wasn't being obedient? He had to back off because he was coming up against the word and he couldn't. Yeah. He knows the word better than we do. He just doesn't believe the end. He thinks he's going to win still because he's deluded. He's the father of lies. He doesn't know anything about truth.
I thought he was only allowed to cause a problem for somebody if he was given permission.
The only person that can give him permission is you. He cannot get authority from anybody else. He doesn't go to God and say, can I torment this person? No. The only person that can give him the authority to do anything in your life is you.
Yeah, by sinning.
So Satan is man's enemy, not Yahweh's. Just as an ant isn't much of a threat to the universe. And when he tempted Eov, did Yahweh give him permission to do it? No. People have got this illusion that God actually gave him permission to do it. He never gave him permission to do it. No, he didn't give him permission to do it. He pointed out the reality of the situation. And what he actually said to him was, he pointed out that unlike Satan himself, that he had given man free will, and because of that, Satan was trying to tempt him to intervene and say no. If he'd have said no, then that took away free will. What he was saying was, I am not going to interfere. You do whatever you have to do, but my money's on him. My trust's in him. He didn't actually give him permission to do it. What he didn't do was forbid it.
So that's actually been a misconception then.
Yes. He has given us free will, and he will not violate that. Just as he did with Yeshua in the wilderness. In the wilderness he could have turned around and say, hands off, this is my boy. But he let Yeshua use this word to challenge him, and when he used the word to challenge him, he had to back off. And he does the same with us. We turn around and say, defend us. And he's saying, I've given you the tools. Defend yourself.
Yeah.
Do not be overawed by this accuser.
When that man attacked me, that man thought someone standing above me.
Yes.
Because I have to sorry. And he thought 3 times. And he tried 3 times.
Yeah.
He couldn't swear to me. He tried to swear. He said, you. And he couldn't do it. And then suddenly I said, get out. And he threw my window.
Yeah. But the point was that Yahweh would not be tempted to intervene. Just like Yeshua wouldn't be tempted to go against Yahweh's word.
So that if a person has a situation arises, it's God's word that we need to
Yes.
use.
He's always going to tempt you. There's always going to be temptation there, and the way to resist it is with that. Don't turn around and shout at them and scream at them, call them hairy legs. As satisfying as that is, it's not the way to deal with them.
Well, you can't defeat them with man-made objects or...
No. Yeah. So, we have free will, and he wouldn't be tempted to intervene, even with Yeshua in the wilderness or on the execution stake. And just as he does with us, he equips us and expects us to deal with our adversary, who goes about like a roaring lion, trying to frighten us and bluff us into giving him authority, giving him control over our lives. So what authority does he actually have? None. Zero. He has zero authority unless we give it to him. It was stripped from him by Messiah. And even that authority that he had, he'd only received from Adamah in the garden. But Yeshua, the second Adamah, came and stripped it back again. Adamah sold the farm. Yeshua came back and redeemed it. He was our kinsman redeemer, and he redeemed back that was lost in the garden. All of that authority had gone. He'd stripped it back again. He has no authority. And Yeshua tried him, found him guilty, as charged, convicted him, sentenced him, and condemned him. And the only thing that's left to do is to carry out the sentence. Everything else has been done. The only thing that's left now is for the sentence to be carried out. And it will be carried out. But isn't Yeshayahu or Isaiah all about him? In verse 12? No. It's a description of a Babylonian king, probably Nebuchadnezzar II. As with all of these things, all of the experts disagree. You can talk to any one of these experts on these subjects and they'll all give you a different answer. And they'll give you different time frames, they'll give you everything else. So it shows you how effective their knowledge is. And Nebuchadnezzar II described himself as the morning star and son of the dawn. And as the morning star and son of the dawn, he commissioned the Tower of Babel. And basically proclaimed himself as God. So Yahweh told him he would be discarded and unburied, no king's tomb for him, and that he would expel from Babel Bavel itself is still barren today and has never been rebuilt. It literally is the haunt of jackals and everything else. It's in the desert. Saddam Hussein had plans drawn up to rebuild it. And look what happened to him. It's still wasteland. Although, like many others before him, his name and remnant offshoot and insprung. And told Israel to sing a taunt song against the king. Like I said, Saddam Hussein, like many others before him, planned to. So Yeshua must be the morning star, right? Yes. But again, it's a description, not a title. People get hung up on titles and labels. It's a description of who he is and what he is. And the same translation is not used for each of these instances where it's used there. It's used in different ways and means different things. And in this case, it's talking about who he is, not what he is. The references to him are all about his resurrected condition. Whenever he's described as the morning star, it's only ever done after his resurrection.
But you know, that's interesting because the Jewish people, they pray, they dawn pray, go to Shabbat, the dawn pray.
Yes. Unfortunately, the Jewish people brought a lot of pagan, superstitious ideas out of Babylon with them, and they're still using them today. That's what Kabbalah and a few other things are all about. So the references to him are all about his resurrected state, as he ushers in a new day, a new kingdom, and the promise of a new body, to rule and reign with him in Jerusalem. That's what these descriptions are all about. He's the bringer of a new day, the bringer of a new dawn. That's what the description is saying. It's not a title for him. And he's going to do it in a new earth where there's no need of light, because he will be at Shekinah glory. Its light and night will no longer exist, along with death, mourning, crying or pain. Why? Because the old order will have passed away. And that's what this description is all about. This new day, this new dawn, this new morning star will bring in a new order. And the old order will pass away. And you read in there where it says that the stars will vanish from the sky. And the sun will be... And all of these things will disappear. Why? Because he's bringing in a new order. And there'll be no more time. And because there's no more time, we won't need the sun and the moon to govern the day. He will do it. We won't need the stars to show us the seasons. He will be our season. All of these things are all tied up in his word, if you understand what's actually being said. No seasons, no time, just the shalom of eternity. How do we know? Because we have the living prophetic word, Yeshua, made very certain or confirmed. You believers, the ones who need to overcome, and Peter has a lot to say about persecution of false teachers. This is Peter. You need to follow the truth that shines like a light shining in a dark, murky place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Does that sound a bit strange? Didn't know you had a constellation in your heart, didn't you? Because it's describing a process. It's not describing a title. So that's what he's saying. The light will shine. The light will rise within you and burn brightly. Try this paraphrase of it. Until the new day dawns, the new Eden in your circumcised hearts, what new day? The one that happens straight after Yeshua returns at Sukkot. And at that point we're all raised up to rule and reign with him. Why? Because we're in Him and He is in us, and we're united. And we're ready to receive our new body, outlined and described through the promises of the Ruach. Why? Because the in the heart concept is saying, until this trust rises up in you, until you see restored bright hope dawning on the horizon, you won't be able to fully understand the purposes and the direction of the prophesied new kingdom. Simple? Clear as mud? You need to understand these things. You need to study these things and understand what's going to happen and why it's going to happen. And like anything else, it's precept upon precept. It's one thing onto another. Once you've done that, then the next will be able to happen. Then the next will be able to happen. And that's why we can only take one step at a time. Because He builds on things one step at a time. And we say, I'll take the whole lot, please. Just bring it on the back of a lorry. And He says, no, I'll give you this little piece. Then I'll give you the next little piece, and I'll give you the next little piece. And gradually He builds up our life like a picture. And sometimes a jigsaw doesn't make any sense until a particular piece is put in place. And suddenly you think, I know what that is. But until you put that one piece in place, the rest of it just hazy. My granddaughter in particular loves jigsaws, but she always chooses the hardest ones you can get. Like they're all sort of white and brown and green with no actual picture, most of them. The harder the better for her. So the in the heart concept, what it's actually saying to you is, until trust rises up in you, until you see the restored bright hope dawning on the horizon, you will not fully understand the purposes and the direction of the prophesied new kingdom. Because it says, until now, we've only seen partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, thought like a child, argued like a child. Some people are still in that phase. Now that I've become a man, I've finished with childish ways. Well, I think I have, but I haven't. It's amazing. Something comes up and you just instantly react and you realise you're actually reacting the same way you did when you were a child. It's still in there. And it catches you sometimes. We need to mature. But we are supposed to be finished with childish ways. And a lot of people say, we're meant to be childlike. You know that scripture which says, bring the children to me. It doesn't say that we're to be childlike, to be childish. It says we're to be childlike. There's a big difference. And so many people interpret that as being it's okay to be childish. It's not okay to be childish. We have to grow up. But it's okay to be childlike as a concept in the way we believe all things and we hear all things and we're not cynical. Well, not as much as we are now. But He wants us to have that childlike innocence, if you like. So a lot of people still behave like they're still in Sunday school at 50, 60. It's not what He wants. But now we see obscurely in a mirror and then it'll be face to face. Aren't you all looking forward to face to face? If you're not, there's some things you probably need to deal with. For now I know partly, then I'll know fully. Just as Yahweh has fully known me. Isn't that interesting? It's saying that even right now, even though we don't fully know Him, He fully knows us. Okay, well let's throw another one in just for fun. What about hell? Hell is a German word, Helle, H-E-L-L-E, and it was used to describe a mythical pagan underworld. And that mythical pagan underworld was described in great detail in Dante's Inferno. And Inferno is Italian for hell. And it's the first part of Dante's Alighieri's 14th century epic poem called The Divine Comedy. That sounds about as cynical as you can get. But people took that And you talk to most people about hell, and they will give you an exact description of Dante's Inferno. Where did he get his ideas from? He was a Catholic. So it's just part of a poem. And it's also followed, the next part of the poem is the Purgatorio, or Purgatory, and then the one after that is Paradiso, or Paradise. It's an allegorical story telling of the journey of Dante through hell, guided by the Roman poet Virgil. Does that make sense to you? So he's having a journey through hell, describing it in his poem, but he's actually being guided by a spirit guide, Virgil. Virgil's long dead by then.
Well, the Vikings actually had a place called Hell, H-E-L-L, and it was their version of
the underworld.
Yeah, and unlike what most people conceive as hell as being fire and brimstone sort of place, the Viking one was actually cold.
Yes, very cold. Bleak.
Cold.
Yeah.
Cold.
In this poem, hell is depicted as 9 circles of suffering. Who's looking forward to going to 9 circles of suffering? Nobody. And that was the way it was designed. And it's located within the earth. And it's pure fantasy. It's pure fiction. As is purgatory, which is a Catholic boot camp where people go for purification before they get into heaven. So you don't go to heaven, you go to purgatory, and you've got to do some things and get yourself right, and then you can go. But only the righteous people go there to get right before they go to heaven.
They made a lot of money out of that.
Yeah, they used to sell indulgences. Yeah, and very expensive indulgences. So, this is why it was used in the poem. So it's a Catholic boot camp where they go before they go into heaven. Paradise. Paradise is Persian for the walled garden of a palace that contained the harem. Only the harem was allowed to walk within these walled garden, perfume gardens, and the walls were so high that other people weren't allowed to look at the harem. And this is what most Muslims are promised.
Yeah.
That they're going to go to paradise and they're actually going to get into the harem. But that's not what it says in the Quran. It doesn't mention paradise. It doesn't mention a harem. It doesn't mention a walled garden. It mentions other things. But of course that wouldn't be such a good recruiting tool. It still wasn't heaven though. It was merely a place for R&R. Heaven itself, of course, was described as a state of supernatural happiness. And finally, limbo is a place that's on the edge of hell and split into 4 parts. Part 1, those damned forever by original sin. Part 2 is purgatory. Part 3, where the fathers and the patriarchs or the saints wait for their redemption from Messiah. They have to have a special place. And he led them there during his 3-day stay in hell. This is taught today. This isn't... And finally, limbo is the place where the infants go, those who haven't been baptised into the Catholic Church. And the interesting thing is, the good news is, for all Catholic women, is that the Pope has said that for 1 year, all women who've had an abortion can now be forgiven. But only for 1 year, and they have to be really, really sorry. But he's given his priests permission to forgive them. It's bizarre. He hasn't got the authority. Yes, but he's showing it as his mercy. But what he's basically doing is taking God's part and saying, as God, I give you permission to forgive them. But after a year, they're all back in purgatory again. So all of this stuff, it's all pagan. It's all deception. It's all fantasy. So what about Sheol? We hear about Sheol. The rabbis talk about Sheol. And what about Hagenom? Sheol in Hebrew simply means the place of death or the tomb. That's all it means. It's not a word for hell. It just simply means the place of death or the tomb. So it's still not hell. Hagenom, or the valley of Ben-Hinnom, is often used to describe hell. But why? Because that's where all the child sacrifice to Moloch was practiced. And they used to pass the children through the fire as a sacrifice to Moloch.
Did you know in Catholics, in the past places, it used to be the cathedral,
Yeah.
when a child is baptized, passed over candles over
Yeah.
the fire. So this is in the Bible.
So Hagenom, the fires used to be going day and night. The smoke used to rise up day and night. So that's what he was talking about when he said, you'll go to the place where the fire raises up and the smoke raises up and stuff like that. The Romans came in and decided, because it was being used for that, they'd use it as a place of cremation for Roman soldiers. So it was a place of sacrifice to Moloch, and it was also the place where the Romans used to be cremated. And there also used to be a place where they'd burn up any old rubbish, any other people that had died, anything. So it was basically a rubbish dump and a crematorium. And he was using it to describe a function as a place. He wasn't saying, this is hell. So it's not a very pleasant place, but it's still not hell. It's still not a place of eternal torture, which is what people are blackmailed with. I remember back in the days when they had the huge meetings in Britain, the Baptist tabernacles and stuff like that. I've forgotten his name now, but one of the guys. And it said people used to literally cling on to the pillars for fear of falling into hell. Because he made it sound like such a terrible place of eternal punishment. They used to try and frighten people into heaven. And they still do. Fire and brimstone. They used to call them the blood and guts prophets. Because that's all they do, is they talk about hell like that and they preach the blood, the blood, the blood.
Well, there was a time during, I can't remember what century it was, where priests would hear how great it was in heaven and would actually commit suicide.
A lot of young people these days reckon heaven's boring anyway, so they'd rather go to hell. There's more parties there. And that's the concept. It's like, this is an exciting place and this is boring, where they'll just sit around on clouds with feathers on their backs and play harps. They've got no concept of reality. The nearest we come to eternal torture is when death and Hades, again described as hell, are thrown into the lake of fire. And he says, at the end, I will throw death and Hades into an eternal fire. So how can you throw an eternal place of damnation and torture into a place of eternal damnation and torture? Total misunderstanding, total misinterpretation. So it must be a different place for spiritual destruction. It's not a place of physical destruction. It's a place of spiritual destruction, and it's reserved for Satan and all his cohorts.
What people don't realise about Hades is, in Greek terms, Hades was where everyone went to when they died.
Yes.
Not the good or the bad.
No.
Everyone went there when they passed away.
Exactly.
So destroying Hades is actually destroying death itself.
Yes. And he will do that, and he says so.
The Lord that you show us the first to rise from the dead. And it was different after he's risen.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But this concept of hell as this eternal place of fires and eternal damnation and devils everywhere and, you know, guys with shovels stoking the fires or furnace and stuff like that. It's just nonsense. It's just fiction.
With Christmas pantomime.
Yes.
These people that write these books are been to hell and back and come back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Is it just their imagination?
And the best thing is, a lot of people here are still living there. You can live in hell on earth, just like you can live in heaven on earth. Depends on who you choose to follow. Heaven is being in His presence. Hell is being out of it and not being in His presence.
That Gabriel's question was, are those books true, or are they just their imagination?
I'm not going to try and condemn or judge, but read the Word and decide for yourself.
Yeah.
You decide, you read, you study it and see what He says, and not what they say or what others say. What does the Word say? And that's what we do every Saturday. Don't take note of what I said. I'm just laying out a trail of breadcrumbs. I want you to follow them and find out for yourself. You study the Word.
Yeah. So spiritual things. What happens with the soul goes to sloth?
Goes to sleep.
Goes to sleep. And then what about the lake of fire?
The lake of fire is reserved for those end days at the end of that 1,000 years. And He's going to put death in there. Why? Because He's already defeated death, in a sense. He's already defeated the enemy. But what He's going to do is carry out the sentence.
Yeah, spiritual death as well.
Yes. Yes. All of that thing. He's got a special place reserved for him. I think it's Rotorua. Well, it talks about fire and brimstone and sulphur and...
What about those people that he let out and they walked through the town and people saw them?
Yeah.
He can wake them up.
Drive again.
He can wake them up.
But they must recognise them in their days, they saw them before.
Yeah, He woke them up because they weren't in their resurrected state, so they were still the same. So there's a lot of these things. What I'm saying is, you go and study these things and you come and tell me what He says.
People I talk to who are so argumentative, I just say to them, if you got into that, the Lord says, I will allow you to.
Like I said, don't argue doctrine with people. You're wasting your time.
No man will take you out.
Yeah. Don't try and argue doctrine with people because they'll argue back and you'll get into all sorts of controversies. But they can't argue with your testimony. And so, all I can tell you is what's happened to me.
But because they're in the delusion, what they write is very convincing. Very so. Your soul is ever but your spirit?
Spirit is still your spirit. Yes.
Because your soul is your mind, your will and your emotions. Isn't it your spirit that's asleep?
Yes. Yeah, the rest of it's all just flesh.
Yeah.
It's still a clay jar.
Until the resurrection.
All the way through this, you'll see people burying clay jars in the ground until they come back in a couple of thousand years, dig it up and claim ownership.
But simply, John 3 says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him would not perish forever, but have life everlasting." So they're going to perish forever, he says. The bodies will, but not the spirit.
Because surely Yeshua talks about in Matthew, like when I was first given a Bible, I started reading it. There was the bits when Yeshua was talking about the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. There is people.
Yes.
And I was going, I don't want to go there.
The people where there's a weeping and a gnashing of teeth are people who've missed out on the kingdom. People who've rejected the King of Kings. You know, it talks about when they come and they all knock and say, let us in. He's saying, I don't know you. He only says that to people who know about Him but don't have that relationship with Him. That's the difference between the two. If you've got the oil, it's because you have a relationship with Him, a healthy, ongoing relationship, and He knows who you are. But if you just know about Him, you can know the Word, you can preach, you can do anything you like. This is why He'll say to some people, yeah, but we've done this in your name, we've done that in your name, we've done this for you and that for you. And He says, but I don't know you. It's about relationship.
Basically, He would be saying, my seed never got into you. And therefore there's no life in you. Because my life is in my seed.
He says at the transfiguration, His God is living. And for those who are dead, it says, perishing forever. It's a shocking thing.
So hopefully this week I've given you plenty to study. And come back and teach me. I'm going to. So, a bright morning star signalled His birth. There's only one star that would have been bright enough day and night to signal His birth. As prophesied. Kings proclaimed His Jewish kingship. And as I've said before, not only is the spiritual King of kings, but he's also the physical inherited king of Israel through the bloodline of David. That's what he says in there. I was the root of David, and I was also the offspring of David. Who else can say that? So Torah confirms his lineage. We've read in there, it confirms his lineage, who he really is. And it outlines the 54 prophecies that he had to fulfill in the Tanakh. You actually look in the Tanakh, and to be the Messiah, he had to fulfill 54 separate prophecies. And the vast majority of them, apart from him coming back a second time, he's fulfilled. He had to be the genuine promised Messiah. He's the real deal. He is the genuine morning and evening star, the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end, who lights our path, guides us along the narrow way. He is the Shamash. He is the servant candle that sits in the middle. That's the servant candle that lights the other candles. So he lights the Gentile candles, and he lights the Jewish candles. And there you have the body. Two halves, same body, one servant, Yeshua.
And we see but very little
But when he lights our candle, our job is to light the next candle. Our job is to become a Shamash candle. He's the servant candle on our menorah, on our personal menorah in our lives. And he's also the King of Kings. There is no confusion. There is only one Boker, Kokhav, just one bright morning star that heralds a bright new dawn, a brilliant restoration illuminated by his Shekinah glory. Everything else is just a pale, fuzzy, reflected light at best. So in complete agreement with this well-known song that I've just altered tiny a little bit, this little Kokhav of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little Kokhav of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little Kokhav of mine, I'm going to let it shine every day, every way. How about you?